Caroline Hayes was 27 when she thought she had finally escaped the life that never wanted her. For 5 years, her own family had acted like she didn't exist, like she had already disappeared, and maybe that was why she said yes so quickly when a man she barely knew asked her to marry him. It felt like being chosen for the first time. On the very first night after the wedding, he gave her one rule. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was something in it that didn't feel like a request. Never open the locked room at the end of the hallway. At first, she didn't question it. Every house had its private spaces, every person had things they didn't share. But then the nights started to feel different. Every night, after she fell asleep, he would quietly get out of bed and disappear upstairs. Hours would pass. Sometimes he didn't come back until morning. She tried to ignore it. She told herself it was work or something harmless, something she didn't need to understand. But the house was too quiet, and the silence started to feel like it was hiding something. Then one night, she stayed awake. And what she heard on the other side of that door made her realize this wasn't just a secret. There was someone else in that room. Before we go any further, tell me what time you're watching this and which city you're in so I can see how far this story has reached. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The first few days in the house felt quieter than she expected. Caroline moved through each room slowly, noticing how everything was already in place, like nothing had ever been missing before she arrived. The furniture was arranged with precision, the kitchen spotless, the hallway leading upstairs always dim even during the day. It didn't feel new, it felt maintained. Her husband was attentive in a careful way. He asked if she needed anything, if she was comfortable, if the room temperature was right, but the conversations never lasted long. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his answers were short, controlled, almost rehearsed. There was no conflict, no tension, just a distance that never closed. During the day, the house stayed silent. No visitors, no unexpected sounds, just the faint noise of the wind brushing against the trees outside. Caroline tried to settle into a routine, opening cabinets, organizing things that didn't need organizing. Anything to make the space feel like it belonged to her. But every time she walked past the staircase, her eyes shifted upward without thinking. That hallway upstairs stayed out of reach, not physically, but mentally. She told herself it didn't matter. It was just a door. Just a rule. Something simple that didn't need to be questioned. The first time she noticed it, it was past midnight. She turned slightly in bed, her hand reaching out instinctively, but the space beside her was empty. The sheets were still warm, which meant he had just left. She stayed still, listening. No footsteps nearby, no sound from the bathroom, nothing close enough to explain it. Then she saw it. A faint line of light stretched across the upper wall outside their bedroom, barely visible but enough to catch her attention. It came from upstairs, from the end of the hallway she had been trying not to think about. She didn't move right away. Her body stayed still, but her mind didn't. There was a simple explanation for everything, she told herself, something ordinary, something she didn't need to question. He had said it was work. People worked at night all the time. The next morning, nothing felt different. He sat across from her at the table, drinking coffee, calm and composed, as if he had slept through the night without interruption. When she looked at him, searching for something out of place, she found nothing. No sign of fatigue, no distraction, just the same controlled expression. Later that afternoon, she passed by the kitchen doorway and paused when she heard his voice. He wasn't speaking to her. "No one goes upstairs," he said, firm and low. There was a brief silence before a quiet response she couldn't fully hear. "Not for cleaning. Not for anything." Caroline didn't step in. She stayed where she was, just out of sight, her hand resting lightly against the wall. The tone was different from how he spoke to her. Sharper. Final. When he walked back into the room a moment later, his expression had already softened again, like nothing had happened. That night, when he lay beside her, everything looked the same. But it didn't feel the same anymore. It didn't feel like coincidence anymore. Caroline stopped treating the nights as something she could explain away and started paying attention to the details she had ignored before. The pattern was too precise, too consistent to be accidental. Every time she woke up in the middle of the night, the space beside her was empty. And every time, it stayed that way longer than it should have. During the day, she began noticing smaller things that didn't seem important at first. Doors that were always closed. Drawers that were never opened. Areas of the house that no one mentioned. It wasn't just one room anymore. It was the way everything around it was being managed, controlled, kept in place without explanation. That was when she met his brother for the first time. Scott Monroe didn't stay long. He arrived without warning, his car pulling up quietly outside, and walked in like he already knew the house better than she did. When Caroline saw him in the hallway, he paused for a second, just enough to study her before offering a brief nod. There was no surprise in his expression, no curiosity, just a calm acknowledgement, as if he had expected to see her there. "You must be Caroline," he said. His tone was neutral, but his eyes lingered a moment longer than necessary, like he was trying to understand something about her without asking directly. She introduced herself, waiting for him to say more, but he didn't. The conversation ended almost as soon as it started. Later, she found him standing near the base of the staircase, his attention fixed upward. "Do you go up there often?" she asked. Scott didn't answer right away. He glanced at her, then back toward the stairs, as if considering how much he should say. "It's better if you don't," he replied. There was no explanation, no attempt to soften the statement. Just a quiet certainty that made the words feel heavier than they should have been. Caroline frowned slightly. "Why?" He gave a small shake of his head, not dismissive, but final. "Some things aren't meant to be understood right away." The answer didn't satisfy her. If anything, it made everything worse. That evening, she noticed the shift in the house more clearly. Conversations stopped when she entered a room. Movements became quieter, more deliberate. Even the air felt different, like something had been disturbed without being acknowledged. At one point, she passed by the back hallway and saw one of the house staff standing near the stairs, holding a cleaning cloth, but not moving. The woman looked tense, her eyes fixed on the upper floor. "Is something wrong?" Caroline asked. The woman hesitated before lowering her gaze. "No, ma'am." "Then why are you just standing here?" A brief pause. Then, quietly, "We're not supposed to go up there." Caroline studied her for a moment. "Not even to clean?" The answer came quickly this time. No, that word stayed with her longer than she expected. That night, when everything went quiet again, Caroline didn't try to convince herself anymore. She stayed awake longer than usual, her eyes adjusting to the darkness, her breathing steady as she listened for movement. When he shifted beside her, she didn't react. When he stood up, she didn't move. She waited until the sound of his footsteps faded completely before opening her eyes. And this time, she didn't turn away from it. That night, she didn't close her eyes. Caroline lay still beside him, her breathing slow and even, her body relaxed just enough to appear asleep. She didn't turn, didn't shift, didn't give him any reason to think she was awake. Time passed quietly, marked only by the faint sounds of the house settling around them. Beside her, Travis remained motionless for a while, longer than usual. Then, carefully, he moved. The mattress dipped slightly as he sat up, pausing as if listening for any change in her breathing. Caroline kept her rhythm steady, her eyes closed, her focus sharpened on every small sound. When he stood, the movement was controlled, deliberate. No hesitation, no uncertainty. He stepped away from the bed and crossed the room without turning back. The door opened with barely a sound, then closed just as softly. Caroline waited. She counted the seconds in her head, forcing herself to remain still even after his footsteps faded into the distance. Only when the silence felt complete did she open her eyes. The room was dark, but her vision adjusted quickly. She sat up slowly, careful not to disturb anything around her. The hallway outside was empty. She stepped out, her bare feet silent against the floor, and moved toward the staircase. The house felt different at night, heavier, as if the air itself had thickened. Every step she took required more attention, more control, as though even the smallest mistake could be heard. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she stopped. There it was again. A faint glow, barely visible, stretching along the upper wall. Not bright enough to light the space, but enough to confirm that something was happening beyond that door. She stood there for a moment, her hand resting lightly against the banister. Her pulse steady but faster than before. Then she began to climb. Each step felt louder than it should have been, even though she placed her feet carefully. The wood didn't creak, but the silence around her made every movement feel exposed. When she reached the top, she didn't move forward immediately. Instead, she listened. At first, there was nothing. Then, slowly, something broke through the silence. A voice. Low, uneven, not loud enough to understand, but clear enough to recognize as human. Caroline's breath caught, but she didn't step back. She leaned slightly closer, her focus tightening on the sound. It wasn't just one voice. There was another. Softer. Weaker. Interrupted by pauses that felt too long, too strained. The rhythm of it was wrong, like someone trying to speak without the strength to finish a sentence. Caroline felt her chest tighten as she listened, her mind struggling to make sense of what she was hearing. Travis spoke again, his voice quieter this time, controlled but not steady. "I told you to stay calm." The response came after a delay, barely audible. Caroline couldn't make out the words, only the tone. It carried something she couldn't ignore. Not anger. Not conversation. Something else. Something that didn't belong behind a locked door. Her hand lifted slowly, almost without her realizing it, stopping just short of the handle. The door stood there, unchanged, silent from the outside, holding everything she wasn't supposed to know. Caroline didn't touch it. Not yet. But she didn't turn away either. The house felt heavier the next morning. Caroline moved through it with a different awareness, no longer avoiding the questions that had been building inside her. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate, just followed a quiet certainty that had settled in overnight. When Travis left, he didn't say much. A brief glance, a few routine words, then the sound of the front door closing behind him. Caroline stood still for a moment after he was gone, listening to the silence that followed. It stretched longer than usual, as if the house itself was waiting. She turned toward the kitchen first. "I need something to open a lock," she said. The woman standing by the counter froze slightly before reaching under the sink and pulling out a small metal tool. She didn't ask questions, didn't look up, just placed it on the counter and stepped back. Caroline took it without another word. The walk upstairs felt shorter than it ever had before. This time, she didn't stop at the bottom, didn't pause halfway. Her steps were steady, direct, guided by something stronger than hesitation. When she reached the door, she stood in front of it only long enough to take a breath. Then she worked the lock. It didn't open easily. The metal resisted at first, forcing her to adjust her grip, to press harder, to focus on the small movements instead of what waited behind it. A sharp click finally broke the tension. The door unlocked. Caroline pushed it open slowly. The air inside felt different. Not stale, not abandoned, but contained. The room was clean, organized in a way that didn't match the secrecy around it. A bed stood against the far wall, neatly made. A chair sat near the window, its curtains drawn tight. There were books stacked on a small table, a glass of water beside them, half full. And then she saw her. A woman sat on the edge of the bed, her posture rigid, her hands resting in her lap as if she had been waiting. Her hair fell loosely around her shoulders, slightly unkempt, but not neglected. Her clothes were simple, clean, chosen without care for style. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. Caroline felt the air leave her lungs as reality settled in. This wasn't a memory. This wasn't something left behind. This was a person. "Who are you?" Caroline asked, her voice quieter than she expected. The woman didn't answer immediately. Her gaze stayed fixed, studying Caroline with a calm that didn't match the situation. "Caroline Hayes," she said instead. The sound of her own name coming from someone she had never met made Caroline's chest tighten. The woman's expression shifted slightly, something unreadable passing across her face. "So you're the one he brought here," she said. Caroline took a step closer, her grip tightening around the tool still in her hand. "How do you know my name?" The woman's eyes flickered briefly toward the door, then back to Caroline. "They talk about you," she replied. "Who is they?" A faint pause. Then, clearly, Travis Monroe. And his mother. Caroline felt something cold settle deep in her chest. "What is this?" she asked. The woman looked down at her hands for a second before answering. "My name is Elena Ward," she said. "And I'm not supposed to leave this room." The words landed without force, but they carried something heavier than shock. Caroline stood there, unable to move, the space around her narrowing as everything began to rearrange itself into something she couldn't ignore anymore. He didn't look surprised when he saw her inside. Travis stood at the doorway, his gaze moving from Caroline to Elena Ward, then back again, as if he had already accepted this moment before it happened. There was no rush in his movement, no raised voice, only a quiet stillness that made everything feel more controlled than it should have been. Caroline stepped back slightly, her eyes fixed on him. "You knew I would find out." Travis closed the door behind him without answering immediately. The sound was soft, deliberate, final. "It was only a matter of time," he said. The calmness in his voice unsettled her more than anger would have. "This isn't what you think," he continued, walking a few steps into the room. "You're seeing part of it, not the whole situation." Caroline shook her head. "There's a woman locked in your house. I don't need another version of that." Before he could respond, another voice entered the space. "That's enough." Caroline turned toward the doorway as Judith Monroe stepped inside. Her presence changed the atmosphere instantly, not louder, not more aggressive, but heavier. She looked at Elena first, then at Travis, and finally at Caroline, her expression measured and composed. "I didn't expect it to happen this way," Judith said. Caroline let out a short breath. "Then explain it." Judith walked further into the room, stopping near the foot of the bed. "You think this is about control," she said. "It isn't that simple." "It looks exactly like control," Caroline replied. Elena remained seated, silent, her hands still resting in her lap, her attention shifting between them without interrupting. Judith folded her hands together. "Elena Ward is legally tied to this family," she said. "Not by choice, but by circumstance." Caroline frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Travis answered, his voice lower now, "that she has legal authority over assets that don't belong to her alone." Caroline stared at him. "So you keep her here?" "We keep things stable," Judith corrected. The distinction felt meaningless. "Elena was involved in a case years ago," Judith continued. "There were disputes, claims, complications that never fully resolved. If she leaves, everything reopens. Investigations, hearings, public exposure." Caroline's expression hardened. "That doesn't give you the right to lock someone away." "It gives us the responsibility to prevent a situation from escalating," Judith said calmly. "That's not responsibility," Caroline replied. "That's illegal." The words settled heavily in the room. Travis exhaled slowly. "You don't understand how complicated this is." "I understand enough," Caroline said. "She doesn't want to be here." For the first time, Elena spoke again. "I didn't say that." Caroline turned toward her, caught off guard. Elena's gaze remained steady. "Leaving doesn't fix anything," she said quietly. "It just changes who has control." Caroline felt the ground shift beneath her understanding. "So you agreed to this?" Elena didn't answer directly. Instead, she looked toward Travis. It wasn't supposed to involve anyone else. Judith's voice cut in. And it still doesn't have to. Caroline looked at her. You think I'm just going to walk away from this? Judith held her gaze. That would be the easiest outcome. Silence followed. Caroline looked between them, seeing not confusion, not regret, but coordination. Every word, every pause, every decision already aligned before she stepped into the room. In that moment, something inside her settled, not with fear, but with clarity. This wasn't something she had walked into by accident. It was something she had been brought into without knowing. She didn't raise her voice. Caroline stood where she was, her expression steady, her thoughts no longer tangled or uncertain. The tension in the room didn't confuse her anymore. It clarified everything she needed to understand. She looked at Travis, then at Judith Monroe, and finally at Elena Ward, seeing each of them not as separate pieces, but as part of the same decision that had been made long before she arrived. I'm leaving, she said. No one tried to stop her immediately. Travis watched her closely, his posture unchanged. You're overreacting. Caroline shook her head once. No, I'm responding. She walked past him without waiting for another answer, her steps controlled, her movements precise. Judith's voice followed her, calm but sharper than before. You need to think carefully about what you do next. Caroline didn't turn around. I already have. She moved down the stairs, each step feeling lighter than it had in days. The house no longer felt heavy or silent, it felt exposed. For the first time since she arrived, she saw it clearly. Not as a place she needed to understand, but as something she needed to leave behind. Her phone was still on the kitchen counter. She picked it up, her fingers steady as she dialed. The call connected quickly. Her voice didn't shake when she spoke. I need to report something, she said. There's a woman being held inside a private residence. She gave the address without hesitation. Upstairs, footsteps moved, faster now, less controlled. Voices followed, sharper, overlapping, no longer measured. Caroline didn't look up. She ended the call and placed the phone back on the counter, her focus already shifting forward. Within minutes, the quiet outside broke. A vehicle approached, then another. Doors closed. Voices carried through the air, clear, official, impossible to ignore. The structure of control that had filled the house began to collapse under the presence of something it couldn't manage. Travis came down the stairs, his composure finally showing strain. You didn't have to do that. Caroline met his gaze. Yes, I did. Judith followed behind him, her expression tighter than before, the calm calculation replaced by something less certain. This will complicate everything, she said. Caroline held her ground. It already was. A knock came at the door, firm and direct. Travis hesitated for a brief moment before opening it. Two officers stepped inside, their attention moving quickly across the space, assessing, measuring, taking control of a situation that no longer belonged to the people inside it. Caroline stepped aside as they entered, answering their questions with clarity, without hesitation, without embellishment. She didn't look back toward the stairs, didn't need to. What was happening behind her was no longer something she had to face alone. Time moved differently after that. Voices, instructions, movement, all blending into a sequence that no longer involved her decisions. She stayed where she was until she didn't need to anymore. When she finally walked out of the house, the air felt different. Not lighter, not easier, just real. She didn't stop to look back. There was nothing behind her that belonged to her. Later, when everything settled into distance, Caroline understood something she hadn't been able to see before. Being chosen by someone else didn't mean she was valued. Silence wasn't peace. And control, no matter how carefully it was presented, was never something that could be justified by explanation. She had spent years believing that leaving one broken place meant she had found something better. Now she knew better. Some doors aren't meant to be respected. Some rules are not boundaries, they are warnings. And sometimes, The only way forward is to walk away without asking for permission.